Okay, so let's have a look at the tools that we're going to use to make this happen. Now, not every tool or item that you see here is going to be absolutely essential. And what I mean by that is that having it will make your life easier, but you can do without them. So to begin with, obviously you're going to need a board to work on. And this board should be made of wood so that it can absorb the moisture that your iron creates. Because if it doesn't, then it's just going to lay on top of the board, and if you have a pressing or a board cloth over it, then it's just going to soak through, and it's not really nice. Then you also need to have some sort of a cloth to cover your board with. Sometimes you can use a felt type of cloth. Sometimes you can use a denim. I'm using moleskin, and the reason why I'm using moleskin is that, first of all, it's got an even texture. So unlike denim or a tweed, which have like a herringbone pattern or like a twill weave pattern or anything of like that, this has an even pattern. It's kind of like felt, but at the same time, it's also quite solid, as in it's not too soft. When you press on it or you're working on it, it doesn't sink in. It's also very durable. I mean, you can have this for like a year or two on your board without the heat of the iron and the moisture and all of that kind of like getting to it. Also, when you're basting on your board cloth, you don't want a board cloth that is very loosely woven, or one where the yarns are caught every time you put a stitch or when you put the needle into the board cloth. So this doesn't really, the needle doesn't catch this at all. It also absorbs light, and it kind of like just allows you to focus on what you want to focus on. So I probably suggest moleskin, and what I have underneath the moleskin is a layer of felt. So it's felt and then moleskin. And sometimes after 2 years, I just flip it over and use the other side if this side is damaged. But it takes a long time for it to be damaged. So that's on the board. And also, you want the board to be at least as high as your belly button. If it's too low, you're going to hunch forward and you're going to get headache, neck ache, backache, shoulder pain. You're going to be distracted by the fatigue, and you can't focus on what you should be focusing on. And that's the sewing. So that's that on the board. Then I have 2 rulers here, or 3 rulers, and one of them is an L square, and you can see that both of them are made from aluminium. And the reason why I like aluminium is because it doesn't warp or bend over time, whereas wooden rulers, first of all, they need to be really thick in order to be strong. And when they are thick and you're trying to draw a fine line, you have to look over the ruler. But these are quite flat, and they don't kind of like distort over time because of the humidity and changes in temperature. A nice thing about the Fairgate L square is also that it has the scales on the other side, and you'll need those for quick calculations if you're making patterns or if you're trying to divide things up very quickly without having to confuse yourself. And I think this one is also available in a metric version. Then I have a medium-sized ruler, and this is about 12 inches. On one side it shows imperial measures, and on the other side metric measures. Again, very handy, and it's 1 inch wide. This one is 1.25 inches wide, and I think these two are definitely essential. Then I have a protractor triangle, and again, this is very handy because it's small, it's flexible, it's transparent, it's got all the angles that you kind of like need during making, and it's got distances of 5 millimeters. So it's a great all-rounder for small areas where accuracy is needed. Then we have a prickle wheel. I don't use the prickle wheel a lot, not during pattern making, also not during making of any garment, except for I think one area, and that's marking up linings for the sleeves. But of course you can use it sometimes to trace a pattern, or just mark something like lining if you don't want to use chalk. A couple of scissors and shears. First of all, pinking shears. It's always good to have pinking shears because you're going to be, using fabrics that fray a lot, and it's probably best to use pinking shears for those edges, because otherwise it's going to fray all over the place, and it's not really pleasant to work with a fraying fabric at all. Then I have fabric shears, paper shears. Now, as you probably already know, it's best to keep these two separate. You don't want to cut paper with your fabric shears and cut fabric or lining with your paper shears, because one will be blunt and the other will become blunt. Also, please don't buy one of those big shears that you see tailors have on the photographs or when they are being filmed. It's all for show. Those are very old shears. Nothing wrong with old school, but they are not practical at all. You're trying to cut around nice curves, and you're trying to, maneuver your shears around some lines that you've been drawing and tracing. And those shears are just not practical. And they're too heavy. Quite frankly, it's a bit pretentious. This has a cutting size, like a cutting area of 3.5 inches, and I think that's more than enough. You can cut thin, thick, long, wide, soft, hard, anything you want with it. Then, now these interesting ones, these are made for rug making, and the nice thing about them is that I think these are probably the sharpest scissors I have here of the entire collection, and the only thing I cut with them is shoulder pads. And when you sew around the armhole and you want to trim away the shoulder pads, obviously you can do it with the normal shears, but this has made it for me a lot easier and a lot more accurate. Obviously we have smaller scissors. This one is just for cutting thread. This one, which you see, has a curve on it, and I use this for mark stitching. Again, you can do the same with normal scissors, but because of the curve I can really get into the fabric, and they're quite sharp as well, so ideal scissors for mark stitching. Fray check. It's great to have fray check, because if you're making buttonholes or you're dealing with a fabric that frays so bad that even pinking shears can't prevent it from fraying, then it's good to have fray check, because you can just apply a small amount of fray check on the edges, and it will just hold the thread or the yarns exactly where they should be. And it also adds a little bit more rigidity to your buttonholes, so it makes them also a bit more durable for the same reason. Tailor's chalk, obviously an essential tool. We need to mark something, and we don't want to use something that's going to stain the fabric. Wax chalk is available, but it always leaves some, lines when you press it, and it's not really a good thing to have. This is Jimbutsu chalk. It's become extremely popular over the years, purely because it's not, it's not dusty like Hancock's chalk, and it's very durable. It gives you nice, clean, sharp lines, and it doesn't stay in the fabric for too long, so you can always brush it off. Some chalks stay a bit too long, and especially when you're marking cotton or linen, you don't want to have chalk lines staying there. So after that, obviously measuring tape. You're going to need measuring tape. One thing I can say about measuring tape is it's good to have a measuring tape that's not too wide. Some of the newer ones, they're like, half an inch, like 1.2 centimeters. But I think a measuring tape should be no wider than 3/8, ideally a quarter, which is like 6 millimeters wide. Then we have tweezers. Now, everybody knows what this is. So tweezers are used for, pulling out threads and mark stitches. And if you're trying to fold something in and you need access to that small area, but your hands are too big, I use this pretty much for everything. It's got a very strong grip, but also it's got very fine points, so I can turn things with it, and since it's got an angle, it allows me to manipulate smaller areas a lot easier than this one. Needles. We use betweens, and I have sizes. I use the sizes of 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So 5, 6, 7 I pretty much use for basting, depending on how many layers I'm basting through and how heavy the fabric is. And 7, 8, 9 I use for permanent stitching, like felling or making buttonholes or anything of the kind. Unpicker, I think, speaks for itself. We're going to have to do a lot of unpicking. Then I've got this hook here. This is a dentistry tool, and a friend of mine was kind enough to give it to me. And I use this to thin out shoulder pads when I'm building them up or creating them myself. Then we have a buttonhole punch for buttonholes. An open-end thimble is probably the most essential tool of them all. You're going to have this on your finger all the time, in your pocket all the time, and it's probably good to invest in a good one. You can find them on Etsy, eBay. Those are some of the older ones you can get, and some of the newer ones, they're not so nice. They make your finger go green or black after a while, and it just looks disgusting. So that's the thimble. Chalk sharpener speeds up your work. I mean, it's always possible to use a cutting knife if you don't have a chalk sharpener, but a chalk sharpener just allows you to really, go through the sharpening process without having to walk towards another, area where you're, getting rid of the dust. So that's that. Then cutting blade for that purpose, what I just explained. Now this here, if you're not familiar with it, is called a dauber. And traditionally a dauber is used alongside a bowl with some water in it, and they would dip this in the bowl and wet an area and then press it. I don't use it for that. I made this like once because I thought, it's cool to have a dauber and work like the old school way. And then I noticed that lime scale gets there and it's like, it turns into this disgusting thing. So what I'm using it now for is I only use the back side of it. It's got like a brushy effect, and I brush away chalk marks. It's very good for that. Pen, obviously good to have because sometimes you want to mark things permanently. Like if you're working on canvases or you're working on an undercolor or you're marking something that chalk is just not good enough for, or chalk disappears, then a pen or a pencil, a sharp pencil would do the trick. Then we have this lens pump. This is used by photographers to clean their lenses. And it's extremely good for just blowing away dust. It's quite powerful. You can see like, it just blows this pencil away. And what I use it for is if I have, let's say, a chalk line, sometimes this kind of like fades it out and makes it a little bit sharper because it gets rid, it blows away the dust on the side of the line, which just lays there, but is not part of the line. So that's what I use it for. Then next we have a spray bottle. Now, obviously, if you're using a steam iron, you don't need a spray bottle that much. But if you're using a dry iron, then I would say a spray bottle is quite good. Having a dauber is not really something I recommend because a bowl of water next to you, it can always fall. And, there you go, clean it up. Also, you can't really apply moisture to big areas unless you spend time, painting a pressing cloth, which is not really time effective. So having a spray bottle is always good. You can even use the tip of the spray bottle just to brush over a seam. And if you apply enough pressure there, it just leaves like a thin line of water, which is great for partial wetting. Then we have pins. You're going to need pins. Now, pins are not for dressmakers. They're there to help you and they hold things down, and you're going to be thankful to these guys, and I will definitely recommend them. Then we have our threads. Now, starting from here, basting cotton. Basting cotton breaks very easily. It's made from pure cotton. You don't need to make any effort to break it. And the reason why it's so soft is that when you're basting things, you're making big, long stitches. And those can catch every once in a while. And when they catch, they start to pull the entire thread. And where you have fastened off or fastened on is going to contract, like it's going to distort. And if the thread doesn't break, then it might end up bruising your fabric at those ends. So basting cotton, quite thin. Then we have another type of basting cotton, and you can get them in different colors. These two are exactly the same. And this one is slightly thicker and more fibrous. And what happens is this is doubled and then used for mark stitching. And the reason why it's thicker is that you want the mark stitching to stay in the fabric until you take them out. And when these are exposed to moisture and heat, so like steam, they expand and they kind of like hold on to the yarns of the fabric a lot better than this one does. So definitely something to have because this is not really handy for doing mark stitching. Then we have different types of overlocking thread, and you can get overlocking thread and in different, made from cotton, made from polyester. And overlocking thread is a lot thinner than sewing thread, so like machine thread. And it's great to use for areas like padding lapels or sewing a hem, anywhere that is going to be pressed from the top and you don't want the threads to show through, then overlocking thread is your friend for that. Button thread, obviously, it's a lot thicker and a lot stronger than all of these threads, and it's used for buttons. Next we have our hand silk, and hand silk is pretty much the same as machine thread. It's just slightly thicker and it's made of silk and it's already waxed. So you don't see a wax block like beeswax here, because I don't use beeswax. And for the reason that this is already waxed. All you need to do is to take the excess wax off by putting it between two layers of fabric, put a hot iron on them, and then pull the thread away. That will take away the excess wax. And this is used for hand sewing, you know, permanently sewing things up. Machine thread made from polyester. Polyester is durable, it doesn't shrink, or it's, you know, if it's high quality polyester, it doesn't contract when it's exposed to heat. You have a big selection of colors, and it's very important that your seams don't deteriorate over time, and polyester certainly doesn't. Then we have buttonhole twist or buttonhole silk, and this is pure silk. It's like a 3-ply thread, and it's used for embroidery and decorative stitching, and we use it for buttonholes. Lots of colors available. Then we have gimp. Now gimp is used to, well, the effect gimp gives to the buttonhole is that it raises the buttonhole, and it allows the knots of the purl stitch to sit on top of the gimp. It also makes the buttonholes firmer, because gimp is quite stiff, and when the two sides of the buttonhole become firmer, they hold the button down a lot better. When you don't have gimp, it becomes really flimsy and the button can just like easily just slide through it and open up. So gimp is used to slightly give some strength to the buttonholes. Then we have a pressing cloth. This is used to protect your fabric, and pressing cloth, you can have different types of fabric for different things. So this is a velvet, and velvet is, I don't know why it's called velvet, probably because it's like a combination of silesia and velvet. So it's a fluffy type of fabric. It's got a pile, and it's used for the insides, like for the pocket bags of overcoats usually. But you can use it for any type of pocket bag if you wish. But it's slightly thicker, and it's got a pile, and one side doesn't. So this doesn't allow too much heat to go through, but when you spray it and you put the dry iron on top, it does allow a lot of steam to kind of like be created. And so it's great if you want to steam things up. Now, you can also use silesia, which is like a thin cotton, and that allows a lot more heat, and it's good if you're trying to press something you know, with a bit more heat. And linen, which just transfer heat in a second and becomes really hot, is great if you're, you know, for example, working with linen and you need a little bit more heat, or you just something where you need more heat. But this prevents any overpressing from happening because it's a bit thicker, and when you have your pressing cloth being too thin, sometimes it becomes too hot and you can see like an indentation of the iron on top of it. So the next thing is a lint roller. Now a lint roller, again, is great for taking off dust and any excess fibers from your garment, but it's also great to clean your board cloth with it. And if you're working in a workshop, you know, having a brush is not really a nice thing, because, you know, as soon as you start to brush the dust, it goes in the air and it goes into everybody's face, mouth, nose, eyes. It goes into everybody's food, and it's just not nice. So a lint roller will prevent all of that from happening. But then on the other hand, we also have our brush, and a brush is very handy to have because obviously you can brush things away like chalk or brush dust away, but you can also use it as a block. So here I have a wooden block that I use for putting behind my work if I'm working on certain areas, but I also use it for absorbing moisture after I've steamed something and I want that to just set exactly the way it is, like a seam. Having a brush does kind of like all of that at the same time. So it's basically a combination between the lint roller, not quite, but kind of, and the wooden block, because you can use it as a block, you can put it behind something, you can brush things away with it, and if the back of it is flat, you can put it on the fabric after you've steamed it and it will absorb moisture. So therefore a brush is an essential tool. Then we have weights, and weights are great if you're trying to work on an area where you need to anchor 2 points down or 1 point down while you're using both of your hands. Having 2 heavy weights is always great, because they will be like your third and your fourth hand. Just make sure that they are actually heavy, because sometimes they're really big but they're like super light, and you know, you put them somewhere and you think, oh, they are holding things down, but then as soon as you work away, you see that they have been moving. Not good. Also, there is this misconception that a cold iron will set the fabric after it's pressed with a hot iron. Total nonsense. What happens is wood absorbs moisture. So when you have steam trapped in your fabric, when you press this or you put this on top of the fabric, it's going to absorb the moisture. Metal doesn't absorb moisture. In fact, if you take a hot iron and you steam some fabric, or you press some fabric and you put a cold metal iron on top, it creates condensation, but the condensation has nowhere else to go because it's not being absorbed, and so it just becomes wet. So don't use it for that. Then we have our iron. This is a dry iron. This is about 5 kilos. It doesn't need to be 5 kilos. You only need a heavy iron if you're working above, on a fabric that's above 35 ounces, really. You can pretty much make most fabrics with a domestic iron or like a lighter steam iron. The main thing is that you know how to use the iron. That's the thing. In fact, I actually prefer a steam iron, like a domestic iron, because sometimes if you're holding the garment, especially the jacket in your hand, and you want to just press something on top of that, having a 5 kilo iron is quite heavy and it makes you tired. And then last but not least, I have here a scourer, and I use this to sometimes take away some of, things you're working with materials that are starched, or, if you're using lightweight fusing, the glue will kind of sometimes go through and it will stick to the iron. Every week or every 2 or 3 days, it's good to just use a scourer to just get rid of everything that's stuck to your iron. Now, obviously, you don't want to scratch your iron, and a scourer doesn't scratch it, so that's fine. You also have those kind of pastes that I don't have now. It's called, I think, Ease Off or something like that. And it's like a caramel smelling, vanilla smelling, beige kind of like waxy paste that you put on a piece of cloth while your iron is hot, and you can take away all the dirt that's got stuck, like lime scale on the iron, and get rid of that. So that's for the tools. Now, like I said, not all of these tools are absolutely essential. So which ones are and which ones aren't? I'm going to take away every tool that I don't think is essential. Pinking shears, you can do without them. Buttonhole punch, you can make buttonholes without a buttonhole punch. Fray check, yes, you can do without fray check. Pliers, well, I use pliers only for pulling out needles that get stuck when I'm sewing buttons. But can I really do without them? Yes, you can do without them. Now, there are a couple of scissors here. Which ones can I do without? This one I can do without, this one I can do without, and this one. Obviously, I can't do without paper shears. I need something for paper. Prickle wheel, do we really need it? No, we don't. Tweezers, well, can we do without them? Yes, we can. Unpicker, technically we can. It does make your life a lot easier to have an unpicker, but yes, technically we can. So, this hook here, not really relevant at the moment. Needles, we need needles. Now, overlocking thread, do we really need it? Well, if you're doing professional work, yes, but if you're trying to just make a jacket and practice, then no, you do not need them. Next, we have our thimble, definitely need it. Pencil. Do we need pencil? As long as we have chalk, no, we do not need a pencil. We do not need a pen, we do not need a dauber. And I would say if you don't have a chalk sharpener, which is probably likely if you've never done any tailoring, then I would keep the blade and get rid of all of these. So this small triangle, can we do without it? Yes, we can. Can we do without these two rulers? I would say you can probably do without this one if you have this one, but you know, this is not a difficult tool to find, so just find one. Measuring tape, definitely need it. Basting thread, well, this is a bit kind of like tricky. I do not recommend basting with machine thread, but if you really don't have basting thread, any other thread for now will do. You just have to be a lot more careful. So I would say basting thread for a practice jacket, not essential. However, if you're trying to mark stitch something, you better have something to you know, use for the, you know, for the mark stitching, because normal machine thread does not stay in your fabric. So I would say this is probably essential. Do we need two colors? No, we don't need two colors. One is enough. Now, button thread. Again, if you really don't have button thread, just, you know, quadruple your machine thread. So not essential. Pump, not essential. Spray bottle. Well, it really depends. It depends if you're having if you're using a steam iron. If you're not using a steam iron, essential. If you are using a steam iron, not essential. I'll just keep this here. Hand silk, not essential for now. Gimp, we can make buttonholes without gimp. Pins, do we need pins? Well, since you can baste, you probably don't need pins, but you will use them. I mean, they're not difficult to find, so not essential if you really cannot have access to pins. We can make buttonholes without buttonhole silk. It just means that you need to find a thread that's thicker than your machine thread. So this can go out of the way as well. So now we have our machine thread here. Pressing cloth, I mean, come on, man, just take a piece of cloth. Well, lint roller. Can we do without a lint roller? If you have a hoover or you have a brush, yeah, you can do without a lint roller. Now, a wooden block. Like I said, if you have a brush, you don't need a wooden block. Essential, essential. So then we have our iron. We can't do without our iron, so that's going to be here. And weights. Can we do without weights? Yes, technically we can do without weights. And can we do without a scour? Well, yes, we can do without a scour. So everything that you see here, I would say, is absolutely essential. You cannot proceed making a jacket or any kind of like garment without having these basic tools. So I mean, this is like if you're really living in a cage, or like, well, not a cage, but a cave, or under a stone, and you don't have access to anything. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link of some of the suppliers that probably ship worldwide, and wherever you are, you can place an order and have the tools that you need available to you. So that's that for the tools. Now, let's move on to the other set of tools.